And when you are building your relationship with God, it's more than reading the Bible or going to church. You have to make sure that you're actively putting aside time to reverence who God is and what He does. Follow me. Hi y'all, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Shay. I make lifestyle content as well as faith-based content. This year my goal is to read the entire Bible front to back, and I'm doing it with you guys in hopes that we can all grow in our faith together. This video we will be finishing off the book of Leviticus, which is the third book of the Bible in the Old Testament, and we are going to be going over Leviticus chapters 16 through 27. Sounds like a lot, but it's really not that much. If growing in your faith and really truly understanding the Bible is something that you're interested in, please go ahead and subscribe, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button so that you can be notified each week that I post a Bible study video. This week we will be talking about you reap what you sow. Okay, and I know a lot of us have heard that saying before, you reap what you sow, and karma is real. And one thing about karma, it knows how to spin the block. And in this situation, we're going to be talking about God as karma and how God will spin the block if we do not be obedient. Leviticus 26:3 says, if you follow my decrees and careful to obey my command, I will send you rain. Its season in the ground will yield its crops, and the trees their fruit. And then if you go to Leviticus chapters 26 and verse 14, it says, but if you will not listen to me and carry out these commands, verse 16 says, then I will do this to you. I will bring on you sudden terror, wasting diseases, and fever that will destroy your sight and sap your strength. So now we're going to go into summarizing all of the chapters that we have read. Chapter 16, it talks about the Day of Atonement. And this is a ritual that happens where all sin is brought to God. This day was used for the people of Israel to come and make amends for the sins that they have committed, showing that only God can take away sin. Chapter 17, there is a symbolization of blood and life. Blood is represented as a sacred part of life. Life is represented by blood. Points out that before eating animals, slaughtering in blood, people must first bring it to God, showing that God is control of all life. And in this text, in this chapter, blood was a symbolization of life, which also foreshadowed the coming of Christ, who shed his blood for our lives. And then in chapter 18, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You must not do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live, and you must not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you. Do not follow their practices. You must obey my laws and be careful to follow my decrees. I am the Lord your God. Keep my decrees and laws, for the person who obeys them will live by them. I am Lord. So in chapter 18, it talks about unlawful sexual relationships, and it talks about adultery, homosexuality. And if you are curious about where it talks about homosexuality, look in Leviticus 14 and 22. And then in chapter 19, God gives out many commandments. So at this point, God is getting ready to bring the people of Israel to the land of Canaan that he promised them. And the Canaanites lived a completely different life for the Israelites. We know that the Israelites are God's chosen people because he decided to bring them out of Egypt. So once he go ahead and delivers them and gives them their promised land, he wants to make sure that they do not adapt and assimilate to the ways of the Canaanites. So he lays down some ground laws and some commandments for them. In chapter 19, verse 1 said, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy. So the goal of this Christian life is to be more godlike. In Christians, we have to be more like Christ. So this is what God was telling the people of Israel, because you are my chosen people, you have to live a life that reflects me, a life of holiness. And so that's what he points out in chapter 19. And God gives out many commandments and laws during this time. And this is what is considered appropriate behavior for the Israelites to show reflection of them being people of God. And then in chapter 20, it moves on and talks about punishment for people who do not follow these laws or commandments that God has laid down in chapter 19. And it says here, verse 6 of chapter 20, I will set my face against anyone who turns to mediums and spirits to prostitute themselves by following them, and I will cut them off from their people. So right here, God condemns false God worshiping, people who try to foreshadow what God is going to do if they are not ordained by God. Kids that curse their parents, not verbally, but in the form of murder, any type of backstabbing, and very serious crimes against their parents. He talks about punishment for those. He talks about incest. He also talks again about homosexuality and things that are detestable to him and to people of faith. And then in chapter 21, he goes on to talk about rules for priests, and priests serves as mediators between God and the people. And he holds priests, as we talked about in the leadership video, he holds priests to a certain regard because they are the leaders of the people. If the priests are not doing what's right, then you can't expect for the people to do what's right. And you can think of priests as nowadays deacons, preachers, sheep-raiding people who are bringing people to God. They have a certain standard to oppose. So God highlights that in chapter 21 of Leviticus. And then the biggest thing that God highlights that leaders and priests must have is a great deal of self-discipline. So you will see that in chapter 21. And if you move on to chapter 22, we see where God talks about holiness, how to be holy, and specifically how offerings must be protected from uncleanliness. So during this whole entire reading, he studied a few verses. I think it's in the leadership video where we talked about certain offerings were brought to God for certain sins or for certain sacrifices and things like that. When we are bringing things to God and we're laying it on the table, we have to make sure that we're protecting whatever assets that we are bringing to God from any unclean spirits. We have to make sure that we're bringing our best to God, putting our best foot forward at all times. And then in chapter 3, God go ahead and appoints these different days: the Sabbath day, the Sabbath year, the Passover, the festival of unleavened bread, festival of trumpets, and so many other things that God appoints for the people of Israel to celebrate and to set aside time for, just to stay connected to their faith and their relationship with God. And when you are building your relationship with God, it's more than reading the Bible or going to church. You have to make sure that you're actively putting aside time to reverence who God is and what he does. So that is what we were seeing here. And then in chapter 24, we see ritual and ethical stipulations that were taking place, and this was talked about, and then specifically what happened in this chapter was a blasphemer, and blaspheming means to curse God. So this young boy decided that he wanted to curse God, and there is very serious punishment for people who blaspheme against God. So make sure you're being careful with your words when you're speaking of God and who he is, because there are consequences that come with that, and some may end in death. And here in the Old Testament, it's very raw. So this boy ended actually in a death penalty for his blaspheming against God. And then in chapter 25, it introduces the year of rest. God prioritizes rest so much. We know that in the beginning, God created everything, and on the seventh day, he rests. Here in the seventh year, he made sure that the Sabbath was considered a year of rest. And we see this here in verse 5 of chapter 25. It says, "Do not reap what grows on itself, or harvest the grapes of your unintended vines. The land is to have a year of rest." Rest is important. We cannot outwork God. I also did a previous video on that. If you have not seen that video, go back and watch it. But we cannot outwork God. God will make sure that we have more than enough so that we can give things around us as well as ourselves the proper amount of rest so that it can replenish itself. And that's the beauty about the body, the earth, and everything that God has made. He has made it to where if we give it time to rest and store itself, we don't need any outside things to add to it. Then in chapter 26, it talks about where God will reward obedience to the laws that he laid down. Anybody who obeys his laws will reap good benefits. And we see this in chapter 26, verses 3 through 5. It says, "If you follow my decrees and are careful to obey my commands, I will send you rain in its seasons, and the ground would yield its crops and the trees their fruit. Your threshing will continue until grape harvest, and the grape harvest will continue until planting, and you will eat all the food you want and live in safety in your land." Then it goes on to talk about how God will even pursue their enemies for them. Anything that we need, if we obey God, he will provide it for us. We just have to be obedient to the laws that he has set for us. Then we see punishment, the complete opposite of obedience. So God will also punish us for disobedience, and we see this in verses 14 and 17. It says, verse 14, "But if you will not listen to me and carry out all these commands. You will be defeated by your enemy. Those who hate you will rule over you, and you will flee even when no one is pursuing you. Verse 20 says, your strength will be spent in vain because your soil will not yield its crops, nor will the trees of your land yield their fruit. And then in chapter 27, redeeming what is the Lord's. So as God continues to bless his people, he wants the people to give back a tenth of what they have made or what he has given them. And this is the same with tithing. God blesses us with so much, and everything that he blesses us with, whether it's our kids, getting them christening, whether it's our home, letting the pastor come and bless our home, whether it's our finances, tithing our finances, everything that God blesses us with, it's important that we give a portion of that back to him. And the giving of the tenth symbolizes the recognition that everything we have belongs to God. At this point of the reading, God is getting ready to settle the people into the land of Canaan, and he tells them, look, these people here, make sure that you are not adapting to their ways, to their pagan ways that are not of God, because you are my people. I have chosen to bring you out of Egypt. So because I have chosen you, you have standards to uphold as the chosen people. And so they must also protect themselves and the offerings from any unclean situations in order to really reverence God. So also God gives the people of Israel free will. Even though he goes ahead and delivers them and gives them the land that he promised them, he also gives them free will. He doesn't confine them in the situation and say, I want to make sure you guys don't sin. No, he puts them in a life just like he gives us. Every day he gives us an opportunity to wake up and choose to serve him and choose to live a holy life, right? He gives us an opportunity to make conscious decisions just as he does with us. And it's important that we all must be aware of the decisions that we are making. Whatever seed that we sow is whatever we will reap. If we sow in good seeds, we will reap good seeds. If we're putting out good into the world, we'll get good in return. That's the idea of karma, right? And God is karma. Whatever we do in this life, we shall reap 7 times more, good and bad. All right. And so what can we learn from this text? 1, do what we know is right at all times. God is always watching. And like I said, God gives us an opportunity to make our own decisions. Not only does he give us an opportunity to make our own decisions, but he also gives us an opportunity to repent. He gives us an opportunity to come to him for forgiveness, which is why he set the Day of Atonement for the people of Israel. That just goes to show you that only God can take away sins. That does not mean go and sin on purpose. Keep sinning, keep sinning, keep sinning. God knows that we are not perfect, which is why he made the Day of Atonement. So it's important that we not take advantage of God's grace and make the right decisions at all times. Do what we know is right. Number 2, stay away from unclean situations. Stay away from people that are negative. Stay away from environments that have bad influences. Stay away from people who have different opposing religious beliefs than you do, because then that's going to put you in the space to have spiritual cloudiness, and we don't want to be in situations that puts us in spiritual cloudiness. As we spoke earlier, when we bring offerings to God, when we come step in front of God, God wants us to protect anything that we bring to him from anything that's unclean, anything that is unholy. And remember, to be holy means to be set apart. And so it's very important when we are walking this life and we're figuring out how to apply these readings to our everyday lives. It's right here in the text. Do what's right. Follow God's commands. Yes, God knows that we are not perfect, but as Christians, we must be held accountable for our actions. If we read and we study and we know what's right, we must do what's right. Number 3, we must honor God with everything that he has blessed us with by giving back in our time and our finances and our worship and our prayer and everything in between. God always shows that all we have is because of him. Nothing that we have is because of who we are. We must always give reverence to God by tithing, community service, anything that shows that we are not in control. This is all God. Make sure you are sowing good seeds, because one thing about karma, it will spin a block. Karma is God. God is real. Whatever we put out there, we will receive it tenfold. So make sure that you are always putting your best foot forward when it comes to God. Now that we are finished with Leviticus, we're going to be jumping into Numbers next week. And we're going to try to read more a day so that we can make sure we get. I'm so anxious to get to the New Testament, but I don't want to start the New Testament without fully understanding the Old Testament and what it was like before Christ actually came and stepped up on the scene. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments below. Once again, if you are just in a season of your life where you are ready to really step into, understand, read the Bible for yourself, grow in your faith, this is the channel for you. We are going to be doing this weekly with each other. So go ahead and subscribe, share this video, like this video, so that I know that I am not alone, because I know I'm not alone in this walk. So I want you guys to continue to stay in prayer, continue to stay in your Bible, continue to stay in clean situations, because God is always watching. You don't have to be perfect, but just be worthy. Show that you are worthy of God's forgiveness, His grace, and His mercy that He continuously gives us. I pray that you have a great rest of your week. I pray that you have a great weekend, and I will see you guys next week. I love y'all, and bye.